effort. "Who are you?" "No, never mind, I can't be bothered to care." The man wasn't any older than Julian himself, certainly not 25, but Julian felt as old as time and as irritable as a school mistress compared to this specimen of self-indulgence. "Get up! Restore that gown to its owner, and be gone before I decide to let your father know what you've been up to." As so often happened when Julian ordered people about, this fellow complied. Julian made his way to Eleanor's study and found her furiously scribbling at her writing table, a mass of wires and tubes arranged before her. She didn't look up at the sound of the door opening, nor when he pointedly closed it behind him. Eleanor, once she was busy working, was utterly unreachable. She'd been like this since they were children. He felt a rush of affection for her, despite how much trouble she was causing him. "Eleanor?" Nothing. He stooped to gather an empty wine bottle and a few abandoned goblets, letting them clink together noisily as he deposited them onto a table. Still no response. "Nora!" It almost physically hurt to say his childhood name for her when things felt so awkward and strained between them. "It won't work," came a low drawl. "I've been sitting here these past 2 hours, and I haven't gotten a response." Banishing any evidence of surprise from his countenance, Julian turned to see Lord Courtenay himself sprawled in a low chair in a shadowy corner. There oughtn't to have been any shadow in the middle of the day in a bright room, but trust Lord Courtenay to find one to lurk in. Julian quickly schooled his face into some semblance of indifference. No, that was a reach. His face was simply not going to let him pretend indifference to Courtenay. He doubted whether anyone had ever shared space with Lord Courtenay without being very much aware of that fact. And it wasn't only his preposterous good looks that made him so noticeable. The man served as a sort of magnet for other people's attention, and Julian hated himself for being one of those people. As far as he could tell, the man's entire problem was that people paid a good deal too much attention to him, but one could hardly help it, not when he looked like that. Even in the improbable shadows of Eleanor's south-facing study, Julian could properly appreciate Courtenay's famous profile, from the aquiline perfection of his nose to the tousled waves of his overlong coal-black hair. Portraitists had fallen over themselves to capture the strong lines of his features in ink and charcoal and oil paints. Rumour had it that the artist of the most famous portrait, the one that had hung in Mrs. Olmsted's drawing-room for years after their affair, had actually paid Courtenay for the privilege of painting him, as if he were a common artist's model and not a peer of the realm. Standing a few scant yards from him, breathing in the scent of the noxious cigarillo Courtenay held in one languid hand, Julian had to scramble to think of anything suitable to say. An insult would do the trick. He was rummaging through his brain to come up with a cutting remark, when a moan sounded from one of the bedchambers upstairs. Julian winced in embarrassment. "Somebody knows how to start the day," Courtenay murmured, his voice somehow even more obscene than the sound overhead. "It's nearly midday," Julian snapped, as if the time were what mattered. "The day is not starting here nor anywhere else in England. Some of us have been up and about for hours." Courtenay held his gaze for a moment, his green eyes heavy with boredom. "My apologies," he drawled. "I stand corrected. I ought to have said that somebody likes having his cock sucked." He paused and glanced upwards, as if meditating on the soft sounds coming from upstairs. "At least it sounds like cock-sucking. No sign of the pounding," here he rhythmically slapped his hand against the arm of his chair, "that you'd expect to hear with actual Enough!" Julian felt warmth spread through his body. Anger and lust all tangled together, the way they so often were where Courtenay was concerned. Damn it. One of his first memories of London was seeing one of Courtenay's portraits hanging on the wall of a salon to which he had somehow managed to get invited. There it had hung, as if daring Julian to look, to stare, to throw away his tenuous claim to respectability and give himself over to pleasures the portrait seemed to hint at. He had assured himself that in person the man's eyes couldn't be quite so striking, that surely the passage of time would have done something to soften the perfection of his features. But when Julian finally met Courtenay this winter, he found the man every bit as appallingly attractive as that portrait. It had taken a heroic effort to behave with some semblance of decorum. And for all that, Courtenay hadn't even seemed to notice him, had scarcely so much as looked Julian's way. Not that Julian wanted to be noticed, or anything so vulgar as that. It was simply that after 6 years spent trying not to lust after a man, it was a bit levelling to have not